Hello, and thank you for coming and watching our presentation. This is for the Undergraduate Research Symposium, and we are three of different majors looking at the Chilean, of what we call the Chilean Spring, and a deep dive and a careful examination of Chilean neoliberalism. My name is Porter Wheeler, and I'm an international studies major.
I'm Soren Choi. I'm a freshman as well, and I'm a political science major.
Hi there, my name is Derek Evans. I'm also a first year on campus, and I am a sociology and psychology major. So I'll be introducing the subject in our abstract with just introducing it as an examination through three different research fields. We're going to be using social theory, we'll be using a lens through political science and different political systems, and we'll also be observing this through an international relations lens, looking at how neoliberalism in Chile relates to other countries around the world through globalism. And essentially what we will be arguing and showing is that neoliberalism has had a lot of adverse effects on Chile, and there's more of that in our hypothesis.
Yes, and as Derek mentioned, we synthesized this into a hypothesis, and our main understanding and working throughout this project was trying to understand and work through the dichotomy of what Chilean neoliberalism is. Because on one hand, it's produced great economic growth for the country, but on the other hand, it's produced great human suffering and human inequalities within the nation itself. So we came to look at this as that while neoliberalism goes and creates economic growth for the country itself and makes Chilean or whichever country be a better trading partner economically, it also hurts the humanitarian factor of it. It hurts the normal civilians that have to deal with this neoliberalism and the policies because of it.
And to kind of look more at our methods in research, the basis of our research was getting data and information about Chile and its population. And we synthesized a little bit of this data we collected into two graphs. And the top graph shows the GDP of Chile from 1960 to 2017. And it shows that Chile has had a pretty steady growth over time in their GDP, especially beginning in the 1970s and 80s. And another graph we chose to synthesize some of our research was a graph that shows the concentration of wealth in the top 1.1 and 0.01% of the fiscal incomes. And this graph really represents how over time we've seen a very little drop in the concentration of wealth at the very top. And it's very startling to see the top 1% owning around 70% of all income in Chile, and the top 0.01% owning around 2% of all the income in the entire country. And so our research really focused on comparing and contrasting these to see which had a bigger effect on the citizens.
And all of this synthesized into the fact of the protests. This is what you are likely to hear about, and this is what sparked our interest and our concern in Chilean neoliberalism was because of the protests. But to catch up to speed, earlier this year, last year back in October, a effect happened. A new policy came into place where metro fare, where most of the citizens of the country utilize the metro system to get around for all their needs of transportation, that fare was increased by 30 pesos. And while 30 pesos may not seem like a lot on the surface, this came as a detonation effect to ignite all of the bubbling over and the past problems that citizens had with the country itself and all of its neoliberal policies. So because of this, the protests have been continuously ongoing. So the main thing to understand here, and what we want to hammer in on for the protests themselves, is the protests are not some surface level thing, but rather something more indicative of the complete failings of the neoliberalism ideology to protect its citizens and to allow for them to flourish and prosper in society itself.
And with that, we observed a lot of the detonation effect and the other adverse effects of neoliberalism, like I said in our abstract, through 3 different lenses. Since I'm a sociology major, I focus more on the sociological, social theory context that presented itself, which focus primarily on 2 aspects, which are social stratification and the identity of being a consumer and a producer, where a lot of citizens were put into that lower class where they were only consuming 30% of the entire GDP that was available in Chile, because they were allowing themselves to be called consumers. They were allowing themselves to be identified as a lower class, and they were allowing themselves to fall into the ranking system as being lower class because they don't own the means of production. And then moving on to the political science aspect of it, there was a lot of strife around how that came about, how the power dichotomy came to be, and how citizens could win back their rights and their identity as being citizens before they identify as consumers. And a lot of that was neoliberalism was installed under a military dictatorship, which is no longer in place necessarily. But the issue is they never moved past that. They formed a democracy, they formed a government that is by the people, but it is not represented by the people necessarily, because there's still a lot of money in it, there's a lot of history in it, and there's a lot of ambiguity in how it was formed in the first place. And then to move on to the international studies lens of all things, is it serves a greater global community in the sense that the world is oriented around income, exports, imports, and making that line go up in terms of GDP because it looks good on paper. But what we usually forget is when we are focusing on having globalism and having everyone make a lot of money for the government, that money isn't usually distributed to the people of those governments and isn't distributed to the people of the world. So that is kind of all of the lenses that we looked at this through. And again, I want to thank you all so much for your time and consideration and coming to watch our presentation, as well as, having an open mind looking at it. And again, I'm Derek Evans. Thank you so much.
Yes. I'm Porter Wheeler. Once again, this presentation will be available as a PDF for you to look through everything and not just listen to us, but look at all of our other resources we have here. And yeah, thank you for watching.
And I'm Soren Choi. Thank you so much for listening.